Awesome. I think we're live. We're good to go. Well, I think good morning to you, Beerud, and I think good evening for us. It's a pleasure to host you at Elevate, and I think our audience is also just catching up. It's a very interesting time. There's just so much to discuss today, and we'd love to talk more about how the talent economy is shaped up. And before I do that, I'd love to give a quick introduction about Beerud and then jump directly to our session of the day, which is the future of work shaping the talent economy with Beerud Sheth. An incredibly versatile businessman, Beerud started out as an IIT Bombay grad, went to do masters at MIT, acquired multi-sectoral expertise to his work with Merrill Lynch, Citicorp Securities at Wall Street, and eventually to founding Elance. Elance merged with Odesk to now create what is known as Upwork, and Beerud eventually moved to build Gupshup, which just recently became a unicorn company and is one of the leaders in the B2B conversational messaging space. Beerud, we're very delighted to host you today. Thank you so much for taking out time.
Anirudh, thanks for having me here. I'm excited to share my thoughts.
Amazing. Awesome. So, very curious to understand, the pandemic accelerated development of the global talent economy. If entrepreneurship wasn't already cool, it certainly is now. Businesses have the added advantage of working with anyone across the world, remote talent on demand. And while this is obviously exciting, it's very interesting to see what COVID's done to the digital world. How do you see the future of work shaping up? Is this the time finally where the remote first economy thesis is being playing out? The biggest bet for talent marketplaces is actually now happening. What's your thoughts behind this?
Well, my thoughts, and I'm just smiling a little bit because I was pitching remote work back in the late 90s, right? In 98, when we started Elance. And to me, it was blindingly obvious then. And it took like 2 decades and a pandemic for the world to realize, that remote work is the right way to go forward. So for me, it just is simply it's like about time. It's like long overdue, and it's finally happened. So you know, I think as an entrepreneur, you want to be ahead of the curve, but not 2 decades ahead of the curve, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, I think now it's great in a way. It forced, a lot of it, as you can tell, was just inertia, because most businesses automatically assumed that you can't go fully remote, but once they were forced to, they did. And in fact, they found in many cases that employees are more productive. They can, talent, I mean, the companies can access talent all over the world. You don't need to pay for real estate and physical infrastructure. A lot of the mid managerial level overhead kind of disappears, and the real workers get rewarded as people who are just sort of hanging around and goofing off, if you will, right? So I think it has had many implications, and of course a lot of implications for tech and so on. But I think just staying at the higher level, I think the world, the society at large, and the business community has seen the benefits of remote distributed work, and I think it's here to stay. There's no going back, right? Once people have experienced this, of course there'll be fine tuning and enhancement of processes and newer tools coming up and so on. But I'm just very excited about the prospects, and we still have barely scratched the surface. I think there's a lot to come. Yeah.
No, totally. I think agree to that. And very curious. You brought the question of having started this. I think 20-25 years ago. What really got you going, right? That time thinking about this as a space, global collaboration, and I think the internet was just kicking in that time. So what really led you to founding Elance?
I think so. You're right. I think, and so this is, again, like 97, 98, right? I think the way, and many of your listeners may not even have been around at that time, or certainly not in a business sense, right? So these were the very early days of the web. People were just figuring out, what can you do with the web and so on. So it's sort of hard for people to relate today. But back then, really, Elance came about because it was really a combination of three of my sort of living experiences, right? One is coming from India, and I was at MIT and then in New York, right? So in Boston and New York. I mean, coming from India, I knew it was very obvious to me that there are talented people all over the world, right? But it wasn't very obvious in New York. I mean, New York or San Francisco, they at that time used to think, oh, this is the center of the universe. There's a lot of things happening here, but there's talented people worldwide. So that was number one. Number two, having been at MIT, having really played around with the internet a lot, it was very clear that it's a powerful way to connect people all over the world. Right now, today it's kind of obvious, but again, at that time, people were still figuring these things out. Like eBay was domestic, Amazon was domestic, right? But you can connect people all over the world. So that was the second big idea. And third was, given my Wall Street experience, I realized that you can build marketplaces even for illiquid, illiquid items, if you will, right? Now, stocks and bonds, everybody buys and sells, so everybody can imagine what a stock market looks like. But on Wall Street, they also trade a lot of illiquid things. Anyway, so I think you combine these three ideas, and what you end up with is sort of a global online, marketplace for services which are very illiquid. And really, that's how it came about. And to me, it just logically seemed very, very obvious. And in fact, we did a pilot test, right? And it was kind of funny. We found like a couple of businesses to try some test projects, and I looked at some of the IIT students in IIT Bombay, actually, right, saying, hey, it was the summer of '98. And we're like, look, can you do some work on the side, software programming? And they were like delighted because they could get what was small sums, but it was all in dollars, so it would be pocket money for them. There was more than what their internship was paying them at that time. And they were very good at being able to write up some software code and so on. And this was like literally, I mean, it's hard to imagine, but this was like literally the first sort of remote projects done at that time through an open marketplace and so on. So anyway, it was very obvious that it was working well, and we scaled it up.
Makes sense. And Birud, usually there's this tipping point and inflection point at every marketplace, right? Which that's that's when that I think it's running. And what was that for Elance?
I think it was, again, surprising it may seem, it was very, very difficult and hard going, right? In the sense that, now again, I have to take you back in time, but a lot of the technology didn't exist, right? So we literally had to invent everything, right? I mean, there were no sort of, there was no cloud, right? So there was no shared sort of cloud storage, and there was no Zoom, there was no, even Skype had barely started at that time. So a lot of it was very email and text messaging oriented, right? So we had to set up like these, shared folders, and and milestone based tracking and listing of projects and bidding. I mean, all of this was very, very new technology. And then you get to payments. I mean, PayPal didn't exist, right? So how do you do payments across 40 countries? I mean, this was a sort of challenge, and all of these are critical enablers, right? I mean, you need this for these things to work. So it was really, one, technically it was very challenging. We had to build a lot of products, and each of these, as you can imagine, now is a company, right? Zoom is a big business, Skype is a big business, PayPal is a, and Dropbox is a big business, and we were all trying to do it all together in one place, which was crazy. Also, user behavior. Like a lot of businesses were like, how can I trust somebody that I can't see? They're not face to face. What if they run away with my money? What if they're not professional? What if they don't speak my language? What if they work in a different time zone? It just all of this sort of mental barriers, really, if you will. And I think it was, so obviously some people got it, right? And we always had enough success to keep going to the next stage. But to your question, the tipping point kind of happened. It took a while to get there. It was, really with the rise of broadband. I think that was one part of it. The other, surprisingly, was the dot-com bust, right? Now, again, you may not remember, and in 2000, 2001, there was a huge sort of stock market crash, affected a lot of tech companies, and businesses had to save costs, right? So a lot of startups sort of very quickly, I mean, they were nimble, they were agile. A lot of them had laid off people, but they still needed to do work, right? So they saw, hey, Elance is a very easy and powerful way to still get work done cost effectively, but without compromising on quality and things like that. So I think it was a combination of maybe the dot-com bust and the rise of broadband. I mean, that was the other big thing, right? Again, we take it for granted today, but in a world of dial-up modems, right, user experience is very, very challenging. So I think the broadband happened sort of in the early 2000s. So it was around that time that in that maybe somewhere between 2003, four, where it just kind of started taking off a little bit. Yeah.
Makes sense. And had you always thought of building it horizontal first, or you thought about verticalizing? And what verticals really flew?
Well, look, when you're starting out and you're sort of first to the place, I mean, clearly it makes sense to span out and just see how wide a net you can cast, right? And also we wanted to be open to serendipity, right? Because you don't know which verticals could or could not take off, right? Some verticals we thought would work did not, like legal or accounting services and so on, because those, they tend to be, I mean, more secure, more trusted. People don't just work with any lawyer. They want to work with somebody they know or somebody that was referred to them and so on, right? Same thing with accounting and so on. So I think those things did not work as well. On the other hand, anything, web development, writing, translation, I mean, these categories just took off really, really nicely. And I think also, I mean, we were literally the only player, because I think with the, like, right in the beginning around 98, 99, there were many other companies that don't even exist today, but there was something called Guru, something called Moonlighter. There were a whole bunch of other businesses, but after the dot-com bust, I mean, many of them just disappeared. We were literally the only ones, and we were able to set up a broad horizontal platform. And I think, yeah, I mean, and once people get using it, then it's sort of hard to change it as well, right? So I think, and it worked out. It made sense for that time. Yeah.
Makes sense. And I think since then, obviously, talent marketplaces have grown very differently, become more verticalized, very different place. There's us in content, there's Turing in tech, multiple other segments, right? How have you seen this scale up over time, even after Upwork was created, and then Fiverr and all these different segments, uh, and even the model, right? From just
Yeah.
listing to more managed.
Yeah, correct. I think, see, when you're starting from scratch, right, you want to, when Elance launched at that time, we just sort of created the basic set of tools, and we kept it very open, very broad set of categories, and therefore also very flexible in terms of just doing, allowing anybody to list any kind of project, allowing any freelancer to bid for any kind of project. And we focused on the quality, provided some tools for milestone tracking, payments, of course, and things like that, right? But we would constantly hear from a lot of these businesses that they needed, more help, right? So we'd have some project managers, for example, that would help them define the project up front and specify it, and also sort of manage it through the milestones, and so you can avoid, because a lot of disputes usually happen when the initial spec is not clear and so on, right? But the requirements would be very different by verticals, right? So what the software development category needed versus writing and translation versus marketing and brand identity and logo design and so on. Each of these things had slightly different things. So, we, yeah, I mean, at that time, we could see that over time there may be other companies or other players that would get specialized, and maybe I think Elance or Upwork could have and should have done it as well. But I mean, look, I think it's a huge market. There's so many different things going on. So every company, there's only so much any one company can do, right? But clearly, there's an evolution where newer players that specialize in a specific vertical, right? So we've seen companies that focus just on logo design, and they do, some of the processes are more specialized towards designing logos or brand and identity. And then, of course, I've seen it for translation. Obviously, you guys are doing it for writing, and then even software development and so on, right? So you can specialize it a little more, and then the moment you start focusing on a vertical, you can provide an end-to-end experience that's a lot better and a lot more specialized. So I think clearly, it's the inevitable evolution of the space. because I think clearly what you guys have done with writing just makes a lot of sense, right? Uh, because the person who needs these services is not also simultaneously needing like software development and other services. So if you can just focus on that part and do it much better, I think clearly
Yeah.
it works. It gets closer to what businesses need, and and then Elance Upwork can stay on the back end as a sort of horizontal platform. Yeah.
Makes sense. And I think for us, I think we were always firm believers going deep vertical marketplace, then expanding. So the best part for us now is now we've expanded across graphic design, translations, video. So it becomes a more like a broader theme for content as a gamut,
Right.
end to end. So that's coming across. No, makes a lot of sense. And uh, according to you, what are some key things that one really needs to get right about scaling talent marketplaces? What are things people discount that you've usually seen when they're building businesses like these?
Oh, I think really just the process, the technology. I mean, see, ultimately the outcome, right? You need to produce a good quality product. When a customer comes in and they want to get, let's say, some writing done or some graphic designed, I think they really want it to be high quality and at a good cost, and achieving it's getting that quality and cost objective, and of course the timeline is really hard, right? So there's a lot of the devil's in the details, right? Making sure especially when you work with sort of a freelance talent base, making sure you have the right person available at the right time, and the checks and balances, and the hardest part is to do it at scale, right? So then having some redundancy and some checking and verification, some QA, content quality being determined. So a lot of this then requires automation, because it can't be manual and such, and needs to have a very keen understanding of the process, right? The sort of the end-to-end process, from content definition upfront, making sure the businesses describe exactly what they need in the right way, to then breaking it into smaller parts, assigning it to people, getting it back, having the quality team check that it matches exactly the intent of the business, and so on. And then of course the timeline, the reputation management and tracking, scoring of these things and so on. I mean, it just really all of those details have to work right, and there's 100 things have to go right for this to work, and any one of them could be off, and that can ruin the experience. So I think what you guys have done with sort of streamlining and automating the processes, and rewarding and incentivizing the right kind of freelancers to do the right kind of stuff, and just creating like a foolproof process, right? That the overall business outcome for the businesses is great. And I think it's really just that's it, because the demand is massive, right? People need to get stuff done, and if somebody can solve this problem and do it in scale, right? I think then really the sky is the limit in terms of what can be done, because it's just the time, price, and I mean, it's just faster, better, and cheaper than any other alternative, right? This is clearly the right way to do it. And yeah, I mean, it's sort of the same idea, whether Elance, Upwork, or sort of what you're doing, right? Is clearly leveraging freelance talent that works, that produces great content and so on. Usually, where it breaks down is just in the middle, that process, right? So
Makes a lot of sense. And this is also an interesting fact. When people look at talent marketplaces, the general notion is these are going to be ops heavy businesses, a lot of things to figure out. And I just got to know that, say, when Upwork went public, I think there's just about 400, 500 people in the team overall at the scale at which it was. And building such complex businesses with very asset light teams and so on, how difficult was that? Or
so
yeah.
So firstly, what's less known is there were 500 full-time employees, but there were, I think, another 700 to 800, free remote workers or freelance employees at that time, right? Not on
Okay.
the payroll in the conventional sense,
Okay.
but still very much active part of the company. So there were a lot more people than it appears. And that's the whole point, right? I mean, if Upwork doesn't do it, who will, right? So I think they were sort of using their own tools. But I think in general, to your point of building asset light businesses, I mean, it's a lot more possible today than it used to be, right? Because see, the general theme of focus on your core competency and outsource the rest, right? I mean, that has always been a guiding principle to
Yes.
build good businesses. If you try to do too much, you will end up spreading yourselves too thin and doing a bad job at all of it. Instead, if you specialize in what you do and then take specialists in other areas, right? And some of it has to happen through technology, because, like, say, cloud computing makes you don't have to do hosting, you don't have to storage and so on. Like when I founded Elance, I mean, it was crazy. We had to set up like disks and databases in the back office and set up your own data centers, and it was just crazy, right? But that becomes easier. I think the same thing with people and talent, right? Which is, again, have the talent that you need inside the company that's core to your strategy. For everything else, I mean, find other specialists who are better in that field. Writing is a great example. Marketing is a great example. PR, and maybe could even be software development and so on, right? It depends, because certain entrepreneurs, they have they're specialists in real estate, right? But they need somebody to build the technology, somebody to design it, somebody to write the content and the ad copy, and all the other stuff, right? So I think that principle is just focus on the core, outsource the rest, leverage, and as the tools become better and the platforms become better, right? So to me, it's literally that analogy of what cloud computing does for computing resources, these talent marketplaces do for sort of human resources, right? It provides sort of a talent cloud, just like a computing cloud, right? And then as an entrepreneur, you just say, okay, I need these computing resources, and I need these kind of talents to, and you put it together and sort of build the business, right? And it's easier said than done, of course, right? But that's the ideal. If you can get there, then it just really, I think then it becomes, you'll have a lot more entrepreneurship, right? May a thousand flowers bloom. I think you're going to see a lot
Yes.
more of this, so happening faster and faster.
And when you look at it from a different perspective, say at least on the supply, the creator side, like at least for us, right? I think building talent marketplaces by nature is spawning new generation of entrepreneurs, because a person who's freelancing at the end of the day is doing all other 10 things, and the fact that you're able to bring that demand to them is in a sense helping them drive their own micro businesses of sorts, which is, I think, a great win-win play. I think it's a win-win business on both sides.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think the whole idea of this, to me, so one part of it is, of course, the analytical part of it to me is the, talent marketplaces drive so much efficiency, right? Because you have people all over the world that have so much potential that is often not realized, right? I mean, there's this whole thing of, you know some people have very high paying jobs and some people are
Yeah.
looking, and it just sort of highly hugely inefficient. In fact, once you have these mechanisms, it drives flexibility on both sides, right? People can work when they want to and vacation when they want to. They can hang out with family when they need, or they can come back and work as needed, and vice versa. On the business side, they can be more agile in responding to customer needs and require and business, dynamic business circumstances. So ultimately, there's no question that we are going to have more and more flexibility through these talent marketplaces. So I think that, like I said, we barely scratched the surface. There's a lot to come.
Makes a lot of sense. And Birut, for you especially, entrepreneurship's a long journey, and you started late 90s. Then you started up again with Gupshup, right? What really prompted you to do that all over again, and how do you do it every single day?
I don't have any other talent. This is what I like to do. So maybe that's the answer. No, but I think, look, I love creating, ideating and creating new things. And Elance was on a good track. I mean, what's less known today, but there was a time where we started with this marketplace, and then when the dot com bust happened, we pivoted to sort of a B2B model, in like 2001 or so, right? And I was at that time I had very little experience with enterprise sales and so on, right? So I wasn't that excited about it, but I still stayed on with the company and for another 4 or 5 years. And then so we had hired an enterprise CEO, and he was scaling the business and so on. So that's when I, after a long period, I kind of left and said, let me start another company, which was more consumer focused, Gupshup, right? Uh, the irony of it is, after I left, maybe a year later, Elance sold off the enterprise business and refocused on the original idea, which was the marketplace that we had set up. And today, it's sort of grown a lot. And then, and the double irony is, Gupshup also started as a consumer play, pivoted to enterprise, but this time I stayed with it, and we've scaled up the business very nicely, and so on, right? So of course, Upwork is public already, right? 3 years ago they did an IPO, and Gupshup hopefully could be there next year too. So I think it's I mean, I love entrepreneurship and everything about it, and it's not even just the good parts, right? Even the challenging parts, and there are many. I mean, both Elance or Upwork was a 20-year was an overnight success, 20 years in the making, right? And and then Gupshup is like, what, about 15 years now, right? So it's been a very long journey, but I think, and we went for 10 years without funding and so on, right? But at every point you're just saying, look, I don't control all the rest, valuations and this and that. You focus on building value, focus on innovating, creating, talking to customers, and so on. And I think that's the fun part of it, right? So this is not the easiest way to make money, that's for sure, because it's very stressful. But on the other hand, it's really very rewarding, and I like it. So I think it's I've been doing this. Yeah.
Awesome. No, Beerud, I think this is lovely thought. And to wrap up, right? What is your one message for say entrepreneurs like me who are operating on the talent economy space, and who fundamentally think there's a lot to human capital which is still underutilized, right? If I or if I were to phrase it right, if you were to start Elance again today, say for example, uh, what would that look like, and what would you do?
Oh, I think, so many things have changed since we started, right? Like a simple example is, in 98, there was no way you could track location, correct? It took another, almost 9 or 10 years with the smartphone and GPS, where you could track location, and suddenly you could match freelancers based on location, which gave rise to Uber and DoorDash and Ola and Swiggy and so on, right? So all of those, I mean, we don't think of them as talent marketplaces, but they are really people matching businesses. Somebody who
Yes.
needs a car ride and somebody who can provide the car ride, right? Or needs food and somebody can deliver it. And then, vertical specific marketplaces as well, right? So if I were to, I mean, so whenever you're starting again, you kind of have to start with a clean slate, right? With sort of look at what tools, what technologies are available, and where the world is at, right? Where what businesses are comfortable with, and then how do you take the next leap beyond that? But I think there is so much opportunity in terms of enabling, like whether it's writing or graphic design, or then getting to even maybe tech products, more creative content, different languages, different, could be geographic,
Yeah.
geography specific, dialects and so on. So just specializing into more detail, and so on, right? So I think there is just the I think if the sort of freelance model is going to continue to keep making lots of progress, right? Where, I mean, ultimately the end state is what, where you'd have very few of these full-time jobs, if you will, and just a lot more of freelance work everywhere.
Yeah, not totally. I think completely aligned on this. Makes sense. Awesome, Virud. I think this has been very interesting. I think to see how Elance has scaled up to be Upwork, and now you with Gupshup. I think we're always huge supporters. Thank you so much for taking out time today. Really appreciate this. I'm sure the audience loved hearing you and understanding how to go about looking at this space in the future.
Sure, thanks for having me, really enjoyed
Thank
the
you.
discussion.
Thank you so much. See you.